The rain fell hard against the empty streets of Chicago that night. Streetlights flickered weakly through the storm, casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks and abandoned storefronts. Emma Walker held her coat tightly around her trembling body as she hurried through the cold. But no coat in the world could stop the pain she felt inside her chest. Not emotional pain, physical pain. Her breast ached so badly that every step felt unbearable. 3 weeks earlier, Emma had given birth to a beautiful baby boy named Noah, and 3 days earlier, she had buried him. The doctors called it sudden complications. One moment, Noah had been sleeping peacefully in the hospital nursery. The next moment, alarms screamed through the hallways. Emma still remembered the nurses rushing past her. The bright lights, the panic, then silence. A silence so heavy it crushed her soul. Since that day, Emma had barely spoken. She stopped answering calls from friends, stopped eating properly, stopped opening the curtains in her tiny apartment. But her body had not accepted reality yet. Her milk still came. Every morning her chest swelled painfully, reminding her that her child was gone. The grief alone was unbearable. The physical agony made it even worse. That stormy night, Emma sat alone in her apartment bathroom, crying as warm water ran over her skin. Nothing helped. Not the hot towels, not the pain medication, not the advice she found online. She leaned against the sink and stared at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen from endless tears. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. Then suddenly, a memory hit her. Earlier that week, while sitting silently in a pharmacy waiting area, Emma overheard 2 women talking. One of them mentioned that some mothers donate breast milk to babies whose mothers cannot produce enough. At the time, Emma barely listened. But now, the thought refused to leave her mind. Maybe her pain could help someone else. Maybe Noah's short life could still mean something. Without thinking too much, Emma grabbed her coat, covered herself carefully, and stepped out into the storm. The city felt almost deserted. Rainwater splashed around her shoes as she walked through unfamiliar neighborhoods. Her phone battery was nearly dead. She had no plan, no address, only desperation. Then she saw it, a small flyer taped crookedly to a community board outside a grocery store. New mother seeking help, baby boy premature, any support appreciated. At the bottom was an address written in faded ink. Emma stared at it for several seconds. Her heart pounded. Before she could change her mind, she memorized the address and began walking. 20 minutes later, she stood in front of a small old house at the end of a quiet street. One dim porch light glowed through the rain. Emma hesitated. What was she even doing? Who knocks on a stranger's door in the middle of the night asking to help feed a baby? She almost turned around. But then, from inside the house, she heard it. A baby crying. Weak, desperate, hungry. Emma's chest tightened instantly. Without another thought, she knocked. No answer. She knocked again. This time footsteps approached slowly. The door opened only a few inches. A tall man stood there holding a tiny crying baby wrapped in a thin blanket. He looked exhausted, terrified, and suspicious. His beard was messy, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Yes?" he asked cautiously. Emma suddenly forgot every word she planned to say. Rain dripped from her hair onto the porch floor. The baby's cries grew louder. I know this sounds strange," Emma said shakily, "but I saw the flyer." The man's expression hardened immediately. "We're not accepting money," he replied quickly. "No," Emma whispered. "That's not why I came." The man looked confused. Emma felt humiliation burning inside her. How could she explain this without sounding insane? Finally, with tears filling her eyes, she said softly, "My baby died 3 days ago." The man froze. Even the crying baby seemed quieter for a moment. Emma swallowed hard. "I still have milk," she continued, "and I heard your son might need help." The stranger stared at her silently. Shock covered his face. He looked down at the tiny infant in his arms, then back at Emma. Rain poured harder around them. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Finally, the man opened the door wider. "Please," he said quietly, "come inside." The house was small and cold. Baby bottles covered the kitchen counter. Formula containers sat open and nearly empty. Emma immediately noticed unpaid bills scattered across the table. The man gently rocked the crying infant while trying to warm a bottle. "My name's Daniel," he said nervously. "My wife, she passed away during childbirth." Emma looked up sharply. For the first time that night, the pain in someone else's eyes matched her own. Daniel looked embarrassed admitting it. "I've been trying," he whispered, "but he refuses formula half the time." The baby cried harder, tiny fists shaking. Emma stepped closer slowly. "May I?" she asked softly. Daniel hesitated only a second before nodding. Emma carefully took the infant into her arms. The moment she held him, something inside her shattered completely. The warmth of a baby, the tiny breathing sounds, the innocent trust. Tears rolled down her cheeks instantly. "What's his name?" she whispered. "Oliver." Oliver opened his tiny eyes briefly. Emma's hands trembled. For the first time since Noah died, she didn't feel empty. Daniel noticed the tears on her face. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. Emma looked at the hungry infant, then back at Daniel. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I do." Daniel quietly turned away to give her privacy. Minutes later, the crying stopped. Complete silence filled the tiny house. Daniel slowly looked back and froze. Oliver had fallen peacefully asleep against Emma's chest for the first time in days. Daniel covered his mouth emotionally. "You have no idea what this means," he whispered. But Emma was staring at the baby with a strange expression. Not happiness, not sadness, something else. Because as Oliver slept peacefully in her arms, she noticed something tied around his tiny wrist, a small silver bracelet. Emma's entire body suddenly went cold. Her breathing stopped, because engraved on that bracelet were the exact same initials written on Noah's hospital tag. N.W. Emma stared in horror. Daniel noticed her face immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked. Emma looked up slowly, hands trembling violently. "Where," she whispered, "where did you get this bracelet?" Daniel frowned in confusion. The hospital gave it to him after birth. Emma's heart nearly exploded, because Noah's full name was Noah Walker, and the initials on that bracelet matched perfectly. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what Emma suddenly remembered next. 3 nights before Noah died, a nurse had entered her hospital room by mistake. The woman looked terrified when she saw Emma awake, then quickly apologized and rushed out. At the time, Emma ignored it, but now, that nurse's face suddenly returned to her memory with terrifying clarity, and she had been holding a baby with a silver bracelet. Emma's hand shook so badly she almost dropped the bracelet. Little Oliver slept peacefully against her chest, completely unaware that the room had suddenly become suffocating with tension. Daniel stepped closer immediately. "What is it?" he asked again. Emma could barely breathe. "That bracelet," she whispered. "My son had one exactly like it." Daniel frowned. "Well, lots of hospital babies get bracelets." Emma slowly looked up at him. "No," she said weakly. "Not like this." She carefully turned the tiny silver tag toward him. The engraved initials glimmered on the kitchen light. N.W. Daniel's expression changed slightly. "My son's name is Oliver Reed," he said quietly. "That bracelet never made sense to me either." Emma felt dizzy. "What do you mean?" Daniel rubbed his forehead tiredly. "When the nurse brought him to me after delivery," he began slowly, "the bracelet already had those initials on it." Emma's pulse pounded violently. "And you never questioned it?" "I did," Daniel answered. "But they told me the hospital made mistakes all the time and they'd replace it later." He paused. "They never did." The room fell silent again. Outside, thunder shook the windows. Emma stared at Oliver's tiny face. Her mind screamed impossible thoughts she was too afraid to say aloud. No, it couldn't be. Hospitals didn't accidentally switch babies. That only happened in movies, right? But the memory of that frightened nurse kept clawing at her mind. Emma suddenly stood up. "I need to see him." Daniel blinked. "See who?" "The nurse." Daniel looked confused. "I don't even know her name." Emma closed her eyes, trying desperately to remember. Then suddenly, Claire, she whispered. Daniel froze. Emma opened her eyes immediately. You know her? Daniel looked disturbed now. Yeah, he admitted slowly. Claire Donovan. Emma's stomach dropped. How do you know that name? Daniel swallowed hard before answering. She was my wife's nurse the night Oliver was born. The air inside the room felt heavier by the second. Emma sat back down carefully, trying not to panic. What happened to your wife? She asked softly. Daniel's eyes filled with pain instantly. There were complications during delivery, he said quietly. Everything became chaotic. He looked toward Oliver. They rushed my wife into emergency surgery. A few minutes later, Claire brought me the baby. His voice cracked. Then another doctor came and told me my wife was gone. Emma felt tears forming again. 2 broken people. 2 dead babies. Or maybe not dead. No, she couldn't think like that. It was dangerous. Cruel. But the questions refused to stop. What hospital? Emma asked. Daniel answered immediately. St. Mary's. Emma nearly collapsed. That was the same hospital. The exact same floor. The exact same night. Daniel noticed her face turning pale. Emma, he said carefully, what are you thinking? She looked down at Oliver again. Then something hit her harder than lightning. The baby's eyes. Earlier, she had been too emotional to notice. But now she saw them clearly. Dark gray. Exactly like Noah's father. Emma covered her mouth. No, she whispered. Daniel stared at her. What? Emma's voice trembled. My son had those eyes. Daniel took a slow step backward. The room suddenly felt terrifying. Neither of them wanted to say the thought out loud, because once spoken, nothing would ever be the same again. Finally, Daniel whispered, You think this is your baby? The words echoed like an explosion. Emma immediately shook her head through tears. I don't know, she cried. I know it sounds insane. Oliver stirred softly in her arms. Daniel looked overwhelmed. This can't be real. Emma stood up again, pacing nervously across the kitchen. I buried a child 3 days ago, she whispered shakily. But I never actually saw his face afterward. Daniel frowned. What? They told me Noah died suddenly during the night, Emma explained. When I begged to hold him, they said his body had already been prepared. Daniel's expression darkened. That's not normal. I know. Rain slammed harder against the windows. Emma stopped pacing, then looked directly at Daniel. We need DNA tests. Daniel stared at her silently. Every rational part of him wanted to reject this entire conversation. But another part, the exhausted father who had questioned that bracelet for weeks, couldn't ignore the possibility anymore. Before he could answer, a loud knock suddenly hit the front door. Both of them jumped. Daniel frowned. It's almost midnight. The knock came again, harder this time. Daniel carefully moved toward the door. Emma instinctively held Oliver tighter. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Daniel opened the door slightly and immediately froze. Standing outside in the rain was Nurse Claire Donovan. Her face was pale as death, her hair soaked, eyes red from crying. The moment she saw Emma holding the baby, she began trembling uncontrollably. Oh, God, Claire whispered. Daniel stared at her in confusion. Claire, what are you doing here? But Claire couldn't stop staring at Emma. Tears streamed down her face instantly. You weren't supposed to meet, she whispered shakily. The entire room went silent. Emma's blood turned ice cold. What did you just say? She asked. Claire stepped inside slowly, then looked at Oliver, or rather, at the bracelet, and suddenly she broke down crying. Daniel's voice rose sharply. Claire, what the hell is going on? Claire covered her face with both hands. I tried to fix it, she sobbed. I tried so many times. Emma felt the floor spinning beneath her. Fix what? Claire looked directly at her and said the words that shattered both their worlds forever. The babies were switched. Daniel staggered backward. Emma stopped breathing completely. No, Daniel whispered. Claire nodded through tears. The hospital lost power during the storm that night. Backup systems failed for several minutes. She struggled to continue speaking. There were 3 emergency births happening at once. Everything became chaos. Emma clutched Oliver tighter, instinctively. Claire cried harder. One baby stopped breathing temporarily. Another needed emergency treatment. Her voice cracked violently, and in the confusion, I gave the wrong baby to the wrong parent. Daniel slammed his hand against the wall. That's impossible. Claire shook her head desperately. I realized the mistake almost immediately. Emma's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then why didn't you tell us? Claire collapsed into a chair crying. Because by the time I confirmed it, the hospital administrators panicked. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. Claire looked completely broken now. They said the situation would destroy the hospital, destroy careers, lawsuits, prison. Emma's hands trembled violently. So they lied, she whispered. Claire nodded slowly. Tears rolled endlessly down her cheeks. They told me to stay quiet while they investigated. Daniel looked sick. And Noah? Claire closed her eyes. The baby who died, her voice shattered, was not yours, Emma. Emma's knees nearly gave out. Daniel grabbed the counter for support. Claire looked toward Oliver. That baby, she whispered softly, was always yours. The room exploded into emotion. Emma burst into uncontrollable sobs. Daniel stood frozen in complete horror, and little Oliver opened his eyes once more, looking directly at Emma, as if he recognized her all along. But then Claire whispered something else, something even more shocking. There's another problem. Emma slowly looked up. Claire's face had gone completely white. Someone already knows about the switch. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Claire swallowed hard. The hospital's legal department discovered missing files yesterday. Emma's stomach twisted. And tonight, Claire whispered fearfully, someone broke into my apartment. A cold silence filled the room. Then Claire said the sentence that changed everything again. They're trying to erase what happened. The room fell into complete silence after Claire's words. Rain pounded the windows. Thunder shook the tiny house. But inside, nobody moved. Emma held Oliver tightly against her chest while her entire body trembled. Daniel stared at Claire like he no longer recognized her. And Claire looked terrified. Not guilty anymore. Terrified. You're saying someone broke into your apartment? Daniel asked slowly. Claire nodded. They went through my files. My laptop. Everything. Emma's voice shook. Did they take anything? Claire swallowed hard. The original delivery records are gone. Daniel cursed under his breath. Emma looked down at Oliver again. Her son. The word still felt impossible. Her son was alive. Alive. For days she had believed she buried him. For days she cried herself to sleep, thinking she would never hold him again. And now he was breathing softly against her chest. But another horrifying thought suddenly hit her. If Oliver is Noah, Emma whispered, then whose baby died? Claire lowered her head. A woman named Teresa Mills. Daniel frowned. Claire continued quietly. She was unconscious after surgery. The baby died a few hours later from severe complications. Emma felt sick. So another mother lost her child while I buried hers? Claire nodded painfully. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. This is insane. But Claire wasn't finished. There's something else you both need to know. Emma's stomach tightened instantly. Claire reached shakily into her purse and pulled out a folded paper. Hospital documents. DNA request forms. Emma stared at them. I submitted emergency testing yesterday, Claire said, quietly. Daniel grabbed the papers quickly. His eyes scanned the results. Then his face lost all color. Emma's breathing stopped. What? Daniel slowly looked up. The pain in his eyes was unbearable. The test confirms it, he whispered. Emma burst into tears instantly. Her knees collapsed beneath her. She sank onto the floor, clutching Oliver, while sobs tore through her body. My baby, she cried. My baby. Oliver woke and began fussing softly. Emma held him even tighter. Daniel stood frozen. A strange mixture of heartbreak and relief battled across his face, because the child he had loved for weeks was not biologically his. And yet, he already loved him like a son. Claire wiped tears from her eyes. I'm so sorry, she whispered repeatedly. Daniel suddenly looked at her sharply. Where's my child? Claire's face changed immediately. Fear. Real fear. I don't know, she admitted softly. The room went cold. What do you mean you don't know? Daniel shouted. Claire began crying again. The hospital records were altered after the baby died. Emma looked up in horror. Altered? Claire nodded shakily. The administrators reassigned files to cover the mistake. Daniel slammed the papers onto the counter. You're telling me my son disappeared? Claire couldn't answer, because deep down, they all knew the terrifying truth. Nobody even knew if Daniel's biological child was alive anymore. Emma looked at Daniel through tears. The pain on his face destroyed her. Only an hour earlier, she believed she lost everything. Now she had her son back. But Daniel might still lose his. The cruelness of it felt unbearable. Then suddenly, headlights flashed through the front window. All three froze instantly. A black SUV slowly pulled up outside the house. Claire's face turned ghost white. That's them, she whispered. Daniel moved toward the window carefully. Two men stepped out of the vehicle, wearing dark coats. Neither looked like police. Emma's heart pounded violently. What do they want? Claire backed away from the door. They came to my apartment first. A loud knock at the front door. Then another, harder. Daniel's voice dropped. Call the police. Claire shook her head instantly. I already tried. Nobody came. The knocking became aggressive now. Mr. Reed, a man shouted from outside. We need to speak with you immediately. Emma held Oliver protectively. Every maternal instinct inside her screamed danger. Daniel looked around desperately. There's a back door. Claire grabbed her arm. You need to leave now. Emma blinked. What? Claire pointed at Oliver. If they take those DNA results, everything disappears. The knocking grew louder. Daniel made a decision instantly. He grabbed car keys from the counter and handed them to Emma. Take my truck. Emma stared at him in shock. What about you? I'll stall them. No. Daniel stepped closer. His eyes were filled with pain and determination. Emma, listen to me carefully. He looked down at Oliver. I may not be his biological father. His voice cracked badly, but I protected him since the day he was born. Emma felt tears filling her eyes again. And right now protecting him means getting him away from here. The front door suddenly rattled violently. Open the door! Claire jumped in fear. Daniel looked toward the kitchen hallway. Go. Now. Emma hesitated. Every instinct told her not to leave him. But Oliver began crying loudly again. Daniel gently touched the baby's tiny head one last time. Then he whispered something that completely shattered Emma's heart. Tell him I loved him anyway. Emma burst into tears again. Then Claire grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back exit. The storm outside was freezing cold. Rain soaked them instantly. Daniel's old pickup truck sat beside the alley. Claire shoved the DNA papers into Emma's coat pocket. Drive to St. Helena Church, she whispered urgently. Father Marcus will help you. Emma frowned. Who? But before Claire could answer, the front door inside the house burst open loudly. Men shouting. Furniture crashing. Claire panicked. Go! Emma climbed into the truck, holding Oliver tightly. Her hands shook violently as she started the engine. Then, Daniel suddenly appeared running out the front door. One of the men chased after him. Another grabbed Claire violently. Emma screamed. Daniel punched a man hard enough to knock him backward into the mud. Drive, he shouted. Emma slammed the gas pedal. The truck sped into the storm as shouting faded behind her. Oliver cried in the passenger seat beside her. Emma glanced in the mirror one last time and saw something horrifying. The men weren't chasing Daniel anymore. They were watching her drive away, like she was a real target all along. 40 minutes later, Emma finally reached St. Helena Church on the edge of the city. The ancient building stood dark beneath the storm clouds. She hurried to the doors, holding Oliver under her coat. Then she knocked desperately. Seconds later, an elderly priest opened the door. His eyes widened immediately when he saw the baby. Claire sent me, Emma said breathlessly. The priest looked terrified instantly. He pulled him inside without another word. You shouldn't have come here, he whispered. Emma stared at him. What's happening? The priest locked every door carefully before answering. Then he turned toward her with trembling hands. Because the people looking for you. He paused. Aren't trying to protect the hospital. Emma felt cold fear spread through her body. Then what do they want? The priest looked directly at Oliver and whispered the final shocking truth. They believe your son inherited something worth millions.